Jeremy Hunt's been giving an interview with Sky TV. I'm going to play some of it because it's interesting. Towards the end, he goes on and says he never intended to deliver tax cuts in the autumn. I thought that's exactly what he intended, but he assures us he didn't intend that. But you know that it's a moot point. What they intended, what they might have promised, it's not going to be delivered now. So in a way, it's purely academic. But this idea about whether or not he lied, it's very interesting, as well as the concept that the OBR was informed by civil servants and not by politicians, and that this makes it all the more believable, and it makes Hunt all the more credible, and makes the charge that he is a liar all the more damaging and self-inflicting for the Labour Party and for Rachel Reeves. The tone he takes that he is disappointed is interesting, but he does acknowledge that finances were tight, so it might simply be a matter of interpretation. I think Hunt is probably one of the few members of the House of Commons that maybe one would be reluctant to call a liar. But on the other hand, he has passed through the health service, and he has certainly been instrumental in the suppression of whistleblowers and the failure to bring the health service into order. So it may not be that he's a liar, it may simply be that he is inadequate, which fits much more appropriately with his Mr. Bean-like appearance. Have a look at what he has to say in this interview here.
As you can see, the Shadow Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has joined us, and we're going to get his reaction to everything the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, said yesterday. But first and foremost, his reaction to what Rachel Reeves said about him an hour or so ago.
Jeremy Hunt covered up from the House of Commons and from the country the true state of the public finances. He did that knowingly and deliberately.
So he's a liar. If he covered something up knowingly, he's a liar.
He lied, and they lied during the election campaign about the state of the public finances.
What's your reaction?
I think it's very disappointing that the new government is choosing to do politics this way. I think it actually discredits politics when people call each other liars. And I thought more highly of Rachel Reeves. I actually praised her on election night as being a committed civil servant. I think she can do better than that. The reality is that
Are you angry? Are you insulted by this? I mean, she called you a liar.
Of course, but I'm disappointed more than anything else. I mean, the reality is that we had good plans to deal with the pressures in public finances based on productivity in the public sector, welfare reform, and the Rwanda scheme to deter illegal migrants. Now, Labour has chosen not to go ahead with those plans. They're perfectly legitimately entitled to do that as the new government. But yesterday, Rachel Reeves approved £9 billion of pay rises for public sector workers without asking for any productivity improvements in return, which is what we would have done, indeed what we did last year. That makes them much more affordable. She chose not to do that. She's cancelled the Rwanda scheme, which means that the asylum bill is going to soar. And she's ditched welfare reform from the King's Speech, which means the welfare bill will continue to go up. Now, those are choices that she has made. If there's any black hole here, it is because of choices that the new government has made, because we had good plans in place. And that's why I think people will be very disappointed that she's trying to pull this stunt in claiming there's a fictitious black hole.
That's the prepared speech, by the way, just in case you had any doubt.
Rachel Reeves earlier sort of alluded to the idea that the black hole perhaps was at least smaller than the overall number that was mentioned. But there is about £10 billion of spending, which you were funding through reserves, and the reserves were being blown out from what was available. Now, there's nothing wrong with funding extra spending through reserves, but if you know just a couple of months into a fiscal year that the reserves are going to be used that very same year multiple times over, Could you and should you not have notified Parliament?
Well, let's look at the what that money constituted. 6.5 billion, the bulk of it was for asylum claims. And we had a plan. We were warned by the Home Office that the asylum bill could be up to £11 billion a year by 2026. That number was in the public domain.
It makes perfect sense. Having mismanaged the system so badly, the Home Office is to blame.
And so we had a plan to deal with it. It was the Rwanda plan. What Labour did was they cancelled that plan on day one. They said they were going to do that, and they did. And they crystallised those costs at the most expensive moment when we paid all the costs to the government of Rwanda. We had paid all the costs of the accommodation. We had people waiting to get onto planes. And we didn't get any of the benefit of the lower costs when we sent people to Rwanda, when we wouldn't have had to house them. And most importantly, when fewer people wanted to come. We had people smugglers 2 days before the election telling the Daily Telegraph they were waiting for Keir Starmer to win the election so they could transport...
I'm afraid I don't believe this. This is like a Lee Anderson story about talking to migrants. No, people smugglers, you can't take their word for it, and this is not something on which to base a policy. I find it interesting that Jeremy Hunt is not only blaming the Home Office for the huge amount of money which was being spent, but also then crediting the Home Office with the savings that were going to be made. I find it very entertaining that he wants to have it both ways.
People to the UK. So the asylum budget is going to go up because of what Labour has decided to do.
But that's a very specific example. But I think the key point when it comes to the spending is there might well have been savings had the Rwanda plan ended up being successful in future years. The focus on all of this is on this fiscal year, where future productivity savings or efficiency savings haven't taken effect yet. Future potential benefits from the Rwanda plan, if it solved the immigration crisis, haven't taken effect yet. This year, according to everything that we've heard yesterday, your government would have gone well past its reserves, 2 to 3 times past, and no one was notified about that. I guess the question is, were you aware in any way that the reserves in this fiscal year were going to be bypassed, and could or should you have told Parliament?
But that claim is absolute nonsense, and that's what I'm saying to you. So if you take out public sector pay, around 2/3 of the additional cost is asylum, and it wouldn't have cost anything like the numbers we're hearing about, because we would have carried on with the Rwanda scheme that would have brought the costs down. But I think it's also important to say what all chancellors know is that at the start of a year, we're only 3 months into the financial year, there are pressures on a reserve which you manage down throughout the year. Last year, we managed down pressures in the reserve by £9 billion. You also have underspends where departments haven't spent about £13 billion a year. The reserves at the start of the year were £14 billion. We would have been able to live within our means. I'm a chancellor who did 2 budgets, 2 autumn statements. Every time I lived within my fiscal rules, I would have been able to do the same. And you can accuse me of making many mistakes, but not taking tough decisions on the public finances to make sure that they are in order is something that no one would accuse me of, because I took those decisions, particularly in the autumn of 22, eye-watering decisions to sort things out.
Final thing then, looking backwards on this, Richard Hughes, the chair of the OBR, the independent body, the OBR, said there were concerns about the transparency and credibility of the information the OBR was given. What's your response to that?
Well, I really welcome the fact that he's doing a review. The information that's supplied to the OBR doesn't come from politicians, it comes from civil servants. It's signed off at the highest level, and I'm absolutely confident the Treasury civil servants behaved with total probity and integrity, and I'm sure that's what the investigation will find, and so I welcome him doing it.
So in terms of the details, you mentioned...
Defend what was said in the election manifestos, because it's not that significant. But the idea that I think he's right, that Rachel Reeves is preparing for tax hikes and the spending slash of projects, which goes way beyond the abolition of the Rwanda project, which I think is the right thing to do, by the way. I don't think it's the right thing to do to pinch from old people, and I don't think it's necessarily the right thing to do to pull back on the smaller rail projects. I think the much better option would be to cancel HS2. Certainly, in order to fund the pay requests which are demanded by the public sector, Rachel Reeves needs to find that money somewhere, and it was not available in the budget, which was probably why the Health Service and why the Secretary of State for Health and the Secretary of State for Education were fighting so hard against the various unions that were demanding pay increases, because the money wasn't there. So Rachel Reeves has found that money, but at what expense? I don't think Hunt is a liar. I think he's simply incompetent. And do I think Rachel Reeves is a liar? She sat there and said someone was a liar when she could draw exactly the same conclusion that I draw. Maybe it's not appropriate in today's climate to call somebody incompetent. Maybe you have to identify everyone as a liar. Certainly in the comments section underneath here, people often talk about liars. I think the term is misused. Lying involves telling a mistruth in the knowledge that there is an alternative narrative which contradicts it. And even there, opting for one narrative rather than the other is not necessarily lying. It's simply opting for a different narrative. Lying is knowing what the truth is and deliberately opting for a different narrative in the knowledge that it is untrue. That is a lie. As for the stuff, the internet is awash with rumour at the moment about what happened, about the stabbing yesterday, and about the person who did it, the identity of the 17-year-old, and whether he comes from Cardiff or from Lincolnshire or further afield. And because he's 17, he cannot be named, although RT has named him. I'm not sure whether GB News has named him, but they've certainly hinted. And I've certainly seen the name. And I find it disturbing that we have such a... I mean, this in a sense, this cuts to the heart of why Tommy Robinson got into trouble, because whatever his story, and I've looked at his story very carefully, it's about an underage boy. It's about a child who has behaved badly, but he is still a child. And childhood confers certain protections and safeguards, and we should not abandon them simply to make a point. And Tommy's narrative is about the problems with immigration. The problems with immigration are not the immigrants themselves. The problems with immigration are the failure of the host country, us, to manage the influx of other people and to accommodate them, to bring them into our orbit. And we have fragmented our society so that people who are coming into our country don't really know what is expected of them. We need to look across to other nations who may not necessarily be doing the job well, but they are certainly using technology and educational tools to better effect than we are. So, for example, the Israeli principle of language teaching, which should be one of the first things which is rolled out for anybody who comes to this country. And maybe we should do it on the principle rather like a university loan, where people pay off the money that it costs, the investment that is being made. People pay it off with their initial wages. But at least they have learned English to a standard where they can communicate and function in our country much better than the citizens' test, which is an absurd piece of propaganda couched as some sort of knowledge. It's not knowledge. A lot of it is nonsense about what is a gap year. Oh, for goodness sake! For goodness sake! This is nonsense. There are far many more important things that I would expect people coming into our country to learn and to inhabit. And a program of adjustment to the country, including language awareness and language teaching, I think should be part of our integration program, part of the program of the Home Office. That's number one. We should follow Israel. And number two, I've mentioned this a few times, and one or two people have said in the comments, well, we can't find any stories about this. Well, maybe you're looking at the wrong language. Maybe you're not, China pursued a vigorous, and still pursues a vigorous and completely unprincipled siege on the Uyghur homelands. But part of that was a response to a rise in knife crime. And the Chinese response was to mark knives, was to microchip knives. And the incidence of knife crime dropped almost immediately. Now, this has to be put into the context of the overwhelmingly malignant approach to the Uyghurs, and it needs to be paralleled by clear condemnation of the policies against the Uyghurs. But the fact that technology exists, and the fact that there was a clear reduction in knife crime simply because of the microchipping of knives, means that's a policy that we should be considering and wheeling out, because it's doable at a relatively small price. And beyond that, we need to rethink our entire policing regime. The policing of the past was about being seen, and that in itself was a deterrent. We hear the word deterrent a lot in government, particularly from the last government. But our real deterrent is that presence. The presence on the streets, the presence in the community. And a police force that simply responds to a crisis is a police force that is too late. We don't even, in many towns, don't even know where their police station is because it's been closed. You have to go to some central organisation, central hub. We should have a visible police force in our country. And, so there were plenty of trigger signs that something was wrong with the incident yesterday, with the stabbing, and the unpaid taxi bill, access to this place where the dance and the yoga was taking place. Plenty of warning signs, plenty of opportunities to, but you know, this whole approach of if we had done that, you know, you can't close the door after the horse has bolted. We need to deal with reality as it presents itself. But in future, maybe, if we had a more active presence of police, it would be more discouraging. The police could give greater advice about security and about managing our lives in a safer way. But what worries me about the Manchester airport story is my calls for a safer, more community-based policing are scotched by the image which was rattled across social media that tells us the police are people to be feared, people you cannot identify, people you cannot know, simply people to be feared with a camera. Intimidating. Images of power rather than images of support. We need more support in our community. We need a GP who is accountable. We need to know that when we go to see our GP, they're going to know who we are. Simply having a computer printout is not enough, because those computer printouts can be misread, they can be misleading, and certainly in my case, I know that the information in my GP surgery is different to the information that I saw that was printed out about, for example, my cancer treatment. It's different. So how can I trust what is in my GP surgery? I can't. I can't. And one job that may be possible for the present government is to make sure that in the case of these big monolithic public service institutions, education, policing, and health, we can start to bring everything under single computer systems so that we don't get these glitches where we've got two completely conflicting bits of information about the same person. Mistakes happen, and we need to feed into the system something to stop those mistakes happening, or at least to pick up the mistakes when they happen. And having 2 or 3 different computer systems for the same organization is a recipe for confusion, contradiction, and collapse. We need to improve our systems. We have the technology, and we need to roll out the technology to help us, whether that's microchipping knives, whether that's making the police more visible, whether that's using the truth rather than running around the place screaming that somebody is a liar, and it's respecting childhood. And from that point of view, we need to recover the respect for our justice system, because at the moment it as well has suffered greatly. And it looks from the outside as if we've gone back to the 19th century, and the only people who benefit from justice are the barristers, the lawyers, and the professional people involved in justice. That cannot be right. Justice is there for us.